everyone, and welcome back to the Information Bottleneck. And today we have a great guest, Anastasios, the co-founder and the CEO at Arena. Hi, Anastasios. How are
Hello,
you?
it's great to see you.
Great to have you here. And as always, Ellen, how are you?
Doing great. And it's a pleasure to speak with one of the people who's keeping the field honest right now over at Arena. So always happy to be here.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I think like we can just start and to ask Anastasios. So let's start and like just tell us what is actually Arena does and why we need it.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with you guys. Excited to be, on your podcast. I love the academic tone that you guys take and the deep dives you do on all the technical matters. So excited about that. Arena is a company that's dedicated to measuring intelligence. And the core thesis of the company is that if you want to understand real world performance of AI, then you need to subject it to real users and try to understand whether AI is working for them. It's not enough to collect a static benchmark and to annotate that offline, but rather you need to understand the in the wild behavior when you put it in the hands of millions and millions of people worldwide and what happens. As anybody that has built software knows, users are unpredictable and their needs and preferences are very complex. They're too complex to model without actually giving them a voice, which is what we try to do at Arena. Our platform now, if you go to arena.ai, serves tens of millions of users every month. We are getting hundreds of millions of conversations that we then use to create analytics and leaderboards that drive the North Star of the industry. We're the gold standard AI benchmark on real world usage. Our leaderboards are referenced with essentially every model release. And we take that responsibility very seriously as the guardians of the field.
Yeah, sounds good. And of course, I think that's great, right? Like at the end, one of the best thing to do and the best thing that like we can have as a researchers is real world scenarios. Do you think the cover is enough? Do you think like we are in a stage, we are in a point that like we have enough cover for all the different use cases, or there are some use cases that we are still like under investigate?
So your question, to be clear, is about sort of the coverage of use cases.
Yeah.
In other
Yeah.
words, are there enough users in every single different pocket of in the wild human usage to reflect that? And I would say there's never enough. We always can work harder to both attract different types of users and also report results for them. If you think about it, every single person on earth is a little bit different. And we all use generative AI slightly differently. And so if you really want to provide the most actionable insights to everyone on earth, ultimately what you need is a personalized leaderboard that's just for them. Now, there's challenges in doing that, methodological ones, which I'm excited by. My background is in statistics. I did my PhD in like theoretical machine learning and statistics. So I care about that methodology. And in fact, it's one of the things that attracts me to this problem. But it is an open problem how to do that. That said, we work on it every day at Arena, both in terms of attracting users from all different types of use cases and in terms of analyzing the data. These days, our users, 28% of them are software engineers. Another 20+% of them are creative professionals like marketers and designers. And another 15-20% of them are researchers and students. So it's a pretty high quality subset of the human usage patterns, but of course doesn't reflect everything.
And related to this, I've had a few questions about Arena. One of them is, there appears to be some things that we've learned about human behavior. For example, there's that style control trigger that you can turn on to make sure that model, and maybe you should define what's going on with that style control. And then I'm very fascinated by the usage of ELO scores. I played chess very poorly growing up, and so my scores, I'm pretty embarrassed to admit, but I love that they're being used, especially because I always saw the LLM development world to really parallel the chess engine development world of like 15 years ago, including benchmark cheating and scandals and drama. For anybody that played chess, Rybka is the relevant analogy to Llama 4. So,
Yeah, so maybe I should just talk a little bit about style control. Um, Style control, just okay, zooming out, human preference is very complicated. It's the hardest part about human preference is trying to understand why people vote the way they vote. Um, and ultimately, what we do with those human preferences is we use them in a downstream leaderboard calculation that computes so-called Bradley-Terry coefficients that tell you about the strength of each model. So what do I mean by strength? We use in ARENA a tried and true statistical methodology, this Bradley-Terry methodology, which presumes that every model has a strength, which is a real number that tells you how likely it is to win in a battle against another model, which has its own strength. And the difference in those real numbers, appropriately scaled, is the win rate between those two models. So it assumes there exists these strengths, and then it tries to estimate them with a particular form, which looks like a logistic regression, and that's how you get Bradley-Terry coefficients, which we call the ARENA score on ARENA. Now, because of the complexities of human preference, when you calculate that score, you are calculating an average. You're calculating an average over all the reasons why people vote and all the different people on the leaderboard and all the different the whole prompt distribution, so on and so forth. And one of the questions that we've been getting is, are people voting because of superficial factors, or factors that people consider quote unquote superficial, like style, communication ability, response length? Or are they voting because the answer is better on a substantive basis or more factual and so on? And of course, human preference is some mix of the two. It's neither A nor B. It's some averaging. And so what we try to do is we try to fit a statistical model. We try to say, hey, let's extract all the components of style, whether that's the difference in response length between the models, the number of markdown headers in the responses, the sentiment and the sycophancy of the models. And we turn those into features that we can then regress away to say, what's the predictive power of those features? Well, okay, if those predict the vote, let's subtract that part out and regress on the residual, essentially. And after you've done that, you're getting something that, we believe more faithfully reflects the non-style strength of the models. So when you turn the toggle, that's what it does. It just runs a slightly different regression. Now, there's a little bit of a value judgment about whether style is good or bad that I think we should not be making as a platform. Because, I know people complain about style, but the reality is the way models communicate with humans is very important. And the way humans understand responses and how useful they are to people is highly dependent on the communication ability of the models. I think it's a real benefit of ARENA that we're able to measure this signal.
But your regression is based on the assumption that you actually know how to extract these style features, right?
That's correct.
And in practice, it's not clear, like, actually how you're going to do it, right? Like, I know how you do it, but like, even if you try to make like some predefined features, or like you give like some classifier to do it or something like that, it's not clear that you can actually do it in reliable, like in more, I don't know, in a good way. And it's not clear that you actually can extract, like, that you can separate, right, between style and, like, I don't know, actual knowledge or something like that, even in a perfect world.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a methodological challenge how to do this optimally. I certainly don't think the method that we've implemented is perfect or even near perfect. And we think about how to improve it all the time. In fact, we have an active work stream on it. Not to say that we'll be able to get it right the next time, but I think incremental improvements go a long way. The two major challenges, as I think you brought up, are number one, how do you represent style as a feature? Um, and two, what the right paradigm is for doing the causal inference that's necessary in order to actually disentangle these components, which of course we're currently doing a regression analysis, which is essentially except under strong modeling assumptions and observational regression. And so those are two questions that we think about a lot, and it'd be great for the. I think it's also a fruitful question for the research community actually to try to contribute to these.
Do you try to measure slop at all? And here I define slop as repetitive patterns. Certainly, delve. It's not X, it's Y. What's your opinion on this in models?
That's a great question. I've wanted to create a slop leaderboard for a while. Uh, I've been blocked. I think some
You're
people.
the CEO. You can decide. You can decide whatever you want.
Yeah, no, the team has opinions on it. I think it'd be at least very, very funny. Maybe for April Fools. Um, I would like to measure those factors. It's hard to define what slop is. If you give me a great definition, it might actually, make its way into the leaderboard. So
I just want to say that like this is the time to advertise our paper like a few months ago about anti-slop. That if you try to detect these slop AI patterns. So yeah, we can discuss about it later.
I want to see.
And
Looking it
we
up.
we know the Ig Nobel Prize is at least considering us, and I would love to even get like an honorable mention there
Oh, that's
because it
awesome.
really it makes you laugh, then it makes you think.
That's great. You guys, that would be awesome. An Ig Nobel Prize is like such a career goal. That's incredible.
Yeah. Um, but so I have a question. But like, okay, so like, let's assume that like you have like you can I don't know, identify these like patterns, right, of style. But there is another problem that like at the end the user, I'm not sure that like how the user can measure the if the knowledge is correct, right? Like for an offline data set, you can say, okay, let's check the answer, let's check and just let's see if there is a match. But the user sometimes doesn't have the knowledge to identify it, right?
Well, what we've found is that a lot of our users actually do have quite a bit of knowledge. And because what's happening is that they're asking questions about um things that they care about. For example, I go on Arena, I ask a lot of math questions. If I showed you my history, it's a ton of proofs. And when I get responses from models, I look through them actually quite carefully. And they're useful to me, but also I'm competent to be able to judge the answer. And there's a ton of users like that on Arena. There's also sometimes noise boats for sure. And I think about our challenge as being how do we separate out the signal from the noise? How do we identify the highest quality users that are giving us high quality votes? How do we incentivize people to give us high quality votes? For example, through private, or personal leaderboards that sort of curate so that they are only voting on things where, they actually have an opinion and they want to shape their algorithm. Um, so those are the types of incentives that I think could make the system work.
Are you and I haven't used the arena in a little while. I used to use it a lot back in the day actually. But what I'm wondering is are models today using tools on your platform, and are you measuring models with tool use right now?
Yes. Today we have a few tools on the platform. Of course, there's search, but there's also Code Arena, which you can go to, and it's essentially a vibe coding arena. Um, and models there can make plans, they can execute multi-step tool calls, and it's very much an agentic evaluation. Mhm.
But how you like, okay, so now in this case in agentic AI, right, so like the user gives some task, right? You want to build, I don't know, a UI or an app for something, and then the model will work like for 2 hours and give you a result, right? And then you rate it. But do you think there is a place to have also like other tests, or like to combine it with tests that is like, I don't know, some automatic test thing that like the user can automatically define some unit tests or whatever? Or you say, okay, this is what I only care is about like the final judgment of the user that will
I think it'd be
rate
great to
it.
define intermediate types of feedback signals and more types of feedback signals. That's something that we're thinking about a lot going into this year is how do we extract, more than preference data, final preference data, which is, of course, I think one of the most valuable signals is final preference data. But to your point, it is definitely not the only signal. I mean, even something as simple as are the models failing to call tools correctly? And are they generating code that compiles? Like we have a lot of information like that that we should probably be releasing as part of our leaderboards.
Related to that, I remember seeing, and I don't know if it came from you guys actually on the benchmarks, but I remember seeing a sort of explanation around like what changed in like late November when Opus 4.5 came out and Claude Code got some major updates around improving. I think it was like parallel agents and hierarchical agents and better context compactification. I remember seeing something claiming that agentic tool calling accuracy used to be around 50%, but had by that point gotten closer to 90%. Are these numbers that you've seen or heard and maybe created, or what's your opinion on the kind of accuracy of tool calling and its relation to your leaderboard?
Well, the accuracy of tool calling has definitely gone up over time. Yeah, I mean, none of these top models are doing 50% tool calling accuracy anymore. They're all way above that, like Gemini and Opus and so on. So for sure, there's been big improvements on that front. And what we see from CodeArena when tool calls fail, of course, is that the final websites don't compile, and then the user gets mad and they vote for the other one because they're like, "Hey, I hate this. The model just didn't do anything," or like, "It made a plan. It was a good plan, and it wasn't able to execute." And so, yeah, we see that all the time in our data. It's definitely reflected. That's one of the main signals that goes into, of course, the CodeArena leaderboard because it affects the final compilation so egregiously. There's also retry mechanisms that models have built in, which is quite interesting to see actually, because they'll make the plan, and then you'll see along the way that they fail, and then they'll be like, "Hey, okay, I'm gonna like roll back a step, and then I'm gonna retry it with something different." And then they can like move their way around obstacles. And it is quite an interesting behavior. It's very much agentic. Yeah, we were saying earlier before we, turned on the recording that 4% now of GitHub, I don't remember whether it's commits or PRs, are now made by Claude Code. 4%.
At least
At least that's
4%
how we
today,
know
right?
because people
Yeah.
launder it too.
There are some people in this call that say that they are like trying to hide their use, right? And
Whenever Claude commits something to my GitHub repo, I'm like, please don't say that you're Claude. So I'm embarrassed. I'm too proud to admit that I've ceded control of my coding to Claude, but it's true. I've done it for a lot of things. Although, what I find ends up happening is that it creates a ton of slop. I'm sorry. It does.
yeah.
Like I ask it, hey, make me a repo that does XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And then I go through a few steps and suddenly there's like, 60% of the files in the repo are unused. I'm like, what the hell is all this crap that's sitting on my computer?
Yeah, but this is like, okay, so, but now you have the question, right? Like, maybe if only like the LLM will read it eventually, so maybe that's, well, like, we don't care, right? Like, maybe that's fine that like all this code, it's out there because, I don't know, it will give the context of like the hidden state of the model to the other model that will read it like in a week from now, right? Maybe it's not for humans anymore.
It's true, but at the same time, when I'm doing things that I need to verify, because
Right. Yeah.
what I'm trying to do oftentimes is make scientific figures. I'm trying to like plot my stupid experiments where I'm like resampling noise 1,000 times so that I can, check whether my coverage is correct or whether my, you know, um, statistical method has the right type 1 error, or I can do my bootstrap replicates or whatever. And what'll happen is that there's like 10 different files that I need to sift through that have different variations of methods, which all kind of look right. And it's just like how it's not efficient enough for me to be like, okay, let's check it. So I end up having to tear it apart and spend a long time verifying. I do think it accelerates me, but it's its own problem.
Yeah. Um, I agree. I think like we probably need like two parallel streams, right? One to that files that LLM will read and ones that humans will.
Totally.
I have a question regarding, so you said it like you collect also the intermediate steps. Do you think to train or like to, I don't know, to offer models, to offer frameworks for RL based on your platform?
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like an interesting question. Of course, one of the things that we do to help the community try to do well on human preferences is we release a lot of data. So we've released millions and millions of conversations from Arena. We've probably released more preference data than any company, on the planet. And yes, that definitely, can and should be used as part of an RL flywheel to help people improve their model's performance, on the distribution of human preferences. There is, of course, a broader question of, hey, do we want to actually build like an RL framework or some kind of tooling around this, which I think is a direction the company could go. It's just a matter of focus because it's one of many.
So what is the direction?
No, you go,
So what?
Ravi.
So what? Yeah, what is the direction that is most that excites you most?
To me, a company can only be really the best at one thing. Okay, Google's an exception, but they've been around for a very long time. A startup like ours can only be the best at one thing. And I think for us, that's evaluation. We have to be the evaluation company. It's our moat. It's our brand. Um, we also uniquely positioned to do it as some of the deepest methodologists in the space, given our backgrounds. What I'm looking forward to in 2026 is building the best evaluations in the world. And of course, finding out how to monetize them. They're very valuable both to labs and to enterprises. But building a very rich evaluation ecosystem that helps people get actionable insights on how they should improve their models or how they should improve their agents, that is really what I think we should focus on. Because if we don't have that, what else are we doing? What is our company?
So, and maybe this is yet another kind of thing that you'll try to do in the future. What's your opinion on like structured and or constrained generation? And do you have benchmarks or ever plan to add benchmarks? I partially ask this because there's a debate in the field about like if structured generation harms like output performance, output creativity, and etc.
Yeah, well, we were actually some of the earliest people that identified that fact, actually. Early on when we were doing code, the first versions of Code Arena, which was more than a year, maybe a year and a half ago, um, we realized that, we had two baselines. We had a structured generation baseline where we did structured decoding and we had models output, files of very particular syntax format and so on. And we had a second one, which was let them all go raw and let's post process in order to make sure that the um that things build right. And what we found is that the second one worked better. And we were like, what? Why is this happening? Like, the point is that we shouldn't have to do this. But the structured decoding was messing with the model's ability. I think these days things have changed quite a bit, but we do use, a combination of structured decoding and non-structured decoding in the Code Arena leaderboard. And so, the models that have structured decoding, you can look for yourself and see the performance shift. But, maybe another thing we should be doing is adding another, almost like a stop control tab, like the radio button that we can turn on structured decoding and see how the leaderboard changes. I'm sure people would be interested in this.
Yeah, and there's implementation details all over this, right? So, for example, the backend that you pick will support more or less of like the JSON or Pydantic spec, and even the choice of structure, the choice of prompt and ordering. I mean, the order of your structure actually matters. And I've seen papers that kind of identify the problem of like reduction in output diversity or quality in structured generation, and one called approximately aligned decoding at least kind of identifies some of the reason why performance does drop in some cases, and makes changes that at least they claim and I believe mitigate the problems related to that. So it's at least in my opinion very non-trivial to do a leaderboard for this.
Very non-trivial, for sure. Completely agreed.
I have a question, unrelated question. So what do you think? So I did my PhD in computational neuroscience and came from information theory and there like you have right like you have null hypotheses and all these like rigorous statistics things. How much you think like right you did your PhD in statistics, but how much you think there is a place today to these rigorous analyses? So like at the end, right, you have the experiments and you just let's run it again and again. Okay, let's try to measure someone to average or something like that. But do you think there is a place to more rigorous analysis? Like what is like why to do it? What is the point to do it?
Totally. Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's an existential question for the field of statistics as to what statisticians should be working on in the age of AI. Now, let me first say statistics has been extremely useful. That background has been extremely useful to me in the process of ARENA. If you think about it, a lot of what ARENA does is, takes a statistical foundation, because we're computing regression coefficients, confidence intervals, trying to, and ultimately, what are we trying to do is help people draw conclusions as to which models are best at different types of tasks, with different types of causal analyses, um, and so on, which just requires so much, you know, depth in order to make sure you get it right. So that includes, when our algorithms that are sampling models that go onto the leaderboard are adaptive. What does that mean? And do we have to do reweighting in order to solve it? How do we get an unbiased estimator? Okay, it's not unbiased, but it's consistent. But if it's consistent, then we can get a limit theorem. And if we get a limit theorem, then we can make confidence intervals. And then how do we calculate approximate ranks? Because confidence intervals can overlap. And then what's the methodology for doing that? And the list goes on. Now, the key word that I said earlier was drawing conclusions, because I think a lot of the point of these more quote unquote rigorous statistical guarantees is exactly to help a human at the other side, when making a decision, draw a reliable conclusion. Which model should I be using? Is this model safe for me to upgrade to on the distribution that I care about? Let's say I worked a lot in my PhD days on this methodology called conformal prediction, on also a methodology called prediction powered inference that helps you try to draw conclusions from synthetic data. And those types of techniques are also probably most useful for decision making, post hoc decision making. Can I deploy my algorithm in a healthcare setting and trust that with 99% probability, if it tells me that it's confident, then it will be right? Those are the types of guarantees that I think will be valuable, because they're essentially operational guarantees of reliability. Now, where I do not think those types of guarantees are helpful is in the sort of Wild West ad hoc modeling that's needed in order to produce the next best model. That to me has not proven to be, statistics has not proven to be that useful of a tool in that world. That probably wasn't right. More like statistical validity guarantees have not proven to be that useful in that world. What has proven useful, though, is a solid understanding of modeling. So, like, what is the Bradley-Terry model? And in different kinds of circumstances, how can you extend it? That type of thing is actually very useful, because a lot of the reward modeling that people do these days actually is under the hood. It's just parametric statistics. And it's being repurposed with a more complicated feature extractor to do much more complicated things. But I do think that language is actually really critical, and that people that are equipped with it will be able to sort of ignore the noise and just actually do things that make sense. And it helps you move faster, in my view.
So, I work quite a bit in LLM sampling, right? So temperature, top E, top K, min P, right? And et cetera. At one point, actually, Ravid and I were working, and we didn't get very far, but we were working on trying to create a sampler leaderboard. And so I guess, is this something that you're ever interested in doing? Or at the very least, what do you think the role of LLM sampling is is on the results, and what are your opinions about it?
Well, the more and more parameters there are in an end-to-end agent, the more difficult it is to evaluate. So it's not just the sampling parameters, but also the whole harness and all the settings of the harness. So if you include the harness and the temperature and the min p and the top k and the, all these different parameters, it's it's like this huge multi-factor A/B test that you have to be running in order to try to evaluate. And I think it's a very interesting and important problem to try to evaluate this stuff. I have some methodological ideas on how to do it. Haven't really gotten to writing them out yet because it's been crazy running the company. But but I do agree that this is an important problem because it affects the end result, and it can affect it quite drastically. And I think that this is a great example of the utility of foundational research and foundational thinking in today's world.
I have a related question. So there is both the multi-component, right? Like you have these different parts of the model or the agent that affect it, but also like there are versioning. So do you take into account that, now we are in version 6.4 and before it was like 6.3 and maybe there is some connection between them? Or like for you, it's just another model, a different model that, um, isolated in the world.
We take a very frequentist approach in which we do not model the relationships between successive versions. And the reason is because fairness is so critical to our platform. We see ourselves as having to be so objective, so neutral, that even though we could probably estimate things faster if we wanted to make assumptions like that, the primary goal is to make sure that when people look at the numbers in the leaderboard, they know that they are reliable, they know that they're honest and truthful, they're not biased by any previous results. It's just a, clean representation of, hey, this is this model and here's how humans voted for it. Has nothing to do with anything else.
And related to Ravid's question here, what about quantization with models? I mean, these days you can go on Hugging Face and find sometimes thousands or at least hundreds of quants on very popular models, which might all have slightly subtle or possibly not so subtle effects on output quality. Do you do anything for measuring this or taking it into account today?
So every model that's evaluated on Arena is evaluated end to end. To the extent that there's quantization, it's just factored into the score. That said, I do think, especially given all of the different open source providers that are all quantizing in slightly different ways, I do think it is actually a very interesting question and one that's worth exploring.
And how you deal with companies or like models that send you different versions or like multiple versions of their models?
Lots of companies send multiple versions of their models, but they do so pre-release. So what happens on Arena is that there's all these models with code names because they're in stealth mode, which our users love. The basically people on Arena can get beta access to all the newest models before they get released in GA on model providers' websites. And model providers do this because they want to test the real world performance of their models before they put them out, in the real world. So what we do is we evaluate them. We will share scores back with the providers on these models, and they can use that information to select which endpoint eventually gets released into GA. Especially after there's been pre-release testing, we usually mark scores as preliminary because there is some amount of multiplicity that's incurred when you select a winner from a batch. The effect is relatively small, but we wait to collect a few more votes so that the score continues converging after that. It needs to because it's asymptotically fine, but there's some finite sample corrections that we try to make.
And do you think it like that different like it's like you want to share this information, with with both the audience, the general public, and the companies, or like only the companies?
That's a good question. I think, what we want is for companies to feel comfortable testing. Because the point, the utility for them is that they can sort of understand the performance of their model without creating brand risk for them, right? Like, what if their model sucks and they don't actually want to release it and people really don't like it? Or what if it starts doing wacky stuff when exposed to the real world and, it says inappropriate things and then they don't want to release it? Well, they should have a platform for that kind of real world testing. And I think we provide that to them in a discreet way, but also a way that's very exciting to our users. So I think it's kind of up to the companies if they want to release a model. And before then, we're happy to help them understand its performance so that they can get to the point where they're confident um, releasing it.
And have you had situations where a model that like won on the leaderboard or was doing really well was still not released to the public for other reasons? And I don't know if the example I'm about to give is relevant at all, but I noticed that like OpenAI, supposedly they've been on basically the same pre-training checkpoint since GPT 4.1, I think, all the way up to 5.2, where they had a new pre-training checkpoint, GPT 4.5, which appears to have been too expensive for them to keep running, which is why it's been sunsetted, much to the annoyance of at least a few people at the time. I don't know if that's relevant here, but that's kind of a scenario. I'm wondering if that's happened more, or if you've seen something like that on your platform.
Yeah, model providers will make all sorts of decisions as to whether or not to release. It's not just based on whether or not they're performing well or poorly, but it's also sometimes timing related. Um, or maybe, sometimes they say, hey, it's not good enough. It might not be top 5, and that's really not what they're aiming for, so they'll not release. They'll be like, hey, we don't, not worth it. Model's not good enough. That definitely happens. Mhm.
So, but at the end, my question is like, why did people, or like, why you think people will use your website? Why that like the users will rate it, and why they are coming like again and again to rate like models that maybe they even not, at the end they will not know that this is like
Mhm.
the results will not publish.
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of people have the misconception that Arena is primarily a comparison platform, but that's not necessarily the case. People come to Arena because they want to experience the frontier. People come because they want to have access to all the newest models, even pre-release versions of the models across all modalities: text, coding, image generation, image to video, document summarization and document understanding. All these different capabilities are available here and almost nowhere else, because and it's of course also available for free on Arena, because you can use it here and otherwise you'd have to have 12 tabs open. So that that is a big reason why people come. They continue to come through the door because we give them a clean and accessible way to experience the frontier of AI.
And do you think this is something that like we will keep going? Or does it depend on the like how fast the companies releasing new models? Like, what is the advantage of new models? If at some point there is some saturation, do you think it will affect the users?
Well, it depends on whether you believe that fragmentation will continue. Do you believe that we will be in a future where many flowers bloom? Do you believe that we'll be in a future where, in order to defend their territory, model providers need to specialize? Because that's what's currently happening. Like, OpenAI's got, a lot of consumer, as does Google. Anthropic is going much more towards coding, much more towards enterprise. We have, all sorts of different multimodal providers, all of which have different styles and different strengths. And if that's a world that you believe in, then yeah, Arena can solve fragmentation for users. And solving fragmentation should not be underestimated. Um, if you believe that things will centralize and there will only be 2 winners, well, maybe Arena will provide less value. Um, Still could provide value if there's 2, because you don't have to have the 2 tabs. But we'll see. We'll see where the future leads us.
And are you thinking to help to evaluate models that are more, let's say, spy in specific with specific users. I don't know. For now, a company wants users that are doing this or that. Do you think to provide them a framework to test it on their users?
Yeah, that's definitely something that's like that we've considered, and I think would be very valuable.
So, what do you think the future will be for Arena? And I mean, not taking an opinion on how many flowers bloom, but like, what are you guys working on, and what can we expect in the next 3 months or so? Which seems like an eternity in AI land.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think there's a few different things I hope that we accomplish in 2026. The first is, in the last few months, because I've just been like trying to get the plane to fly, I haven't been as like I haven't been able to write papers. I haven't been able to do as much scientific stuff as I've wanted, only kind of in the background. A couple hours a week I spend, you know, working on science. There's a team working on it at Arena now, which frees me up. I have to like kind of defend them so that they can have their time free. But I think this year I'm going to be spending a lot more of my energy on the science, thinking about how really are we going to develop the future of AI evaluation. And we're going to be doing fundamental methodology. We're going to be writing papers on it. We're going to be releasing it to the website. So expect tons of changes to the leaderboard and very positive ones that are going to help, create new paradigms um, for evaluation. Uh, Also, more improvements to arena.ai for our users. I think what's been great to see is that our user base is highly concentrated in experts. It's a ton of Swedes, it's a ton of researchers. There's 6% of them are like lawyers and almost 6% are doctors. So how are these people coming? Why are these people coming to Arena? To some extent, we don't know. I mean, we've asked them so that we have some information on it, but now that they're here, the platform continues growing. We have to give them an excellent experience for their professional tasks because these users are giving valuable insights that are going to shape the industry. So continuing to build that out is also a huge goal in the coming year.
Well, that now gets me to another question, which is part of at least one reason I can think of why so many people might come to your platform, free inference. And indeed, that leads me to the question of just how do you deal with the scale? Like, you must be just spending enormous amounts of money every month for serving all these models. I to the extent you could tell me, like, is it all just like VLLM or SGLang, or are you doing some very customized inference stuff under the hood, or
Well, most of the models we serve are proprietary, so we don't have the infrastructure for them. We just pay providers, which is of course expensive, but we also make a lot of money. Money in, money out.
Okay, I think we should finish at this point. Do you have any more thing that you want to say to our audience?
One thing I love about your guys' podcast is that the audience is filled with experts, filled with academics that are interested in the nitty-gritty details of this. And this year we're expanding the team at Arena quite a bit. In the process of developing these new foundational methodology and evaluation, we're going to need some of the best minds in the academic world to come join us. And so if you're interested in doing something a little bit different than the normal AI thing, if you're interested in being trying to make sure that we deploy AI responsibly, reliably, that we evaluate AI on all of the economically valuable and critical infrastructure of humanity, we would love if you would join us. So just message me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on X. And I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sounds good. I highly recommend it. Um, okay, Nicola, Anastasios, thank you so much that you join us. It was a pleasure.
Really appreciate the
And good
conversation.
luck. Thanks
See
so
you later.
much.
Good luck to
Bye,
you.
everyone.
bye.